Chapter 3 deals with legal rights and issues in human resource management. And I think it's important to understand the legal environment of human resources, because I think it makes you a better employee by knowing what some of your rights are. The book talks about discrimination laws. I also think it's important that you understand all the ramifications of the Family Medical Leave Act, which is a case where you can take leave to care for yourself, a spouse, a child, a parent, and what your rights are along those lines. So I want to make sure that you are aware of all these things that the book points out. The book also talks about a lot of legal cases. It gives you some examples in a lot of the areas, and I think you might want to delve into some of those in more detail. But the one I want to talk about today, and it's one the book doesn't talk about, but it's really a landmark case for discrimination. And that case is Griggs versus Duke Power Company. The decision came down in 1971, and it's a decision, the book talks about disparate impact, but it doesn't really mention this case, but this is a landmark case because it fought to eradicate arbitrary and artificial barriers to equal employment opportunity. And what the case involved is Griggs was an African-American worker at the Duke Power Company in North Carolina, and Duke had a long history of segregating its employees by race. Of course, the best jobs were reserved for the whites. African-Americans were relegated to the Labor Department, where the highest paid worker in the Labor Department actually made less than the lowest paid employee in the other 4 departments that were only whites only. So after Congress passed Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which made it illegal to discriminate on the basis of race, Duke stopped restricting African Americans to the Labor Department, but announced new hiring, promotion, and transfer standards. And what they said was that in order for to work in positions outside the Labor Department, they required either a high school diploma or set scores on standardized tests that would be equal to those of the average high school graduate. But what the Supreme Court found is that it actually would disqualify African Americans, A, because they did not have high school diplomas, or these tests, which was called the Wonderlic test, and you can Google that and see what kind of questions they asked, was not at all related to the job that these employees were to carry out. So Title VII, the Supreme Court ruled against Duke because Title VII no way prohibits testing or diploma requirements for hiring or promotions when these tests are developed properly, because what they said is a high school diploma or these tests did not in any way relate to the job at hand. And that's what Griggs argued. If you're going to give a test, if you're going to use certain criteria for hiring, promotion, or transfers, it's got to be such that it relates directly to the job at hand. So, again, this was a landmark case in which the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Griggs, and it makes sure that there's not overt discrimination when you have job selection procedures. and trying to pick the best candidate for the job. So Griggs versus Duke Power Company, there are a couple slides in your PowerPoint presentation on Chapter 3, because I do think it's an important case that comes after Title VII, which said you couldn't discriminate on the basis of race, but also adds another nuance to it, in that you have to make sure that testing for a position is directly related to a job. So Griggs versus Duke Power Company, 1971, the Supreme Court. But I urge you to look at some of the other cases that the book highlights. It doesn't give you all the details, but it's simple as plugging in the case in a Google search, and you can get more information about a particular case. But again, I think from your perspective as an employee, and I know many of you are in the workforce, is to look at what your rights are, and to see if something is amiss in your job situation. I mean, there's even a small section on the whistleblower protection, and we've heard about numerous cases of that over the years. People, seeing something that's not being done properly in their organization, and they take it to a higher authority. But I think it benefits us all by knowing our rights. It benefits us all by knowing what an employer can and cannot do. So I think you'll find some of these laws interesting. I think, again, if you look at the cases, you'll find some of those interesting and what they involved and what the outcome of some of those cases were. You think about age discrimination, you think about the Pregnancy Discrimination Act. Think about those things and how they do affect employees. I hope everyone is progressing well in the class at this point in time. If you have concerns, please feel free to contact me either via email or a phone call. I'll be glad to talk with you if you are struggling or having issues, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.